Israel passed a law shortly after they became independent that they would build so many new houses in Gaza to move the Arabs out of the refugee camps that are pathetic. It is. It's a terrible situation, and move them into the new housing so that year by year they'd be moving a certain percentage of these Arabs out.
So this was starting way back in 1948?
Yes, shortly after 48.
Okay.
The Arab nations had the UN pass a resolution forbidding Israel to move you can't believe this, but it happened. Forbidding Israel to move the Arabs out of the refugee camps. Why? Because the Arab nations wanted the refugee camps and the pitiful state of the Palestinians in this refugee camp to become worldwide news and blame it all on the Jews.
Okay. All right.
Unbelievable.
So here, as we look at this, folks, it just gets better and better, doesn't it? When you think about this, and what we're doing here this morning, folks, is we are taking a very deliberate look at a very volatile current situation in the Middle East and saying, let's go back, let's establish some historical background to build upon so we can look at the reality of our experience today through glasses that show us real things versus fabricated things. And it's a very, very different kind of situation than is commonly noted. Okay, you talked about refugees, Ken. You talked about the Arab refugees and the refugee camps. Were there any Jewish refugees?
Okay, let's go back in history. The ancient Jewish state, in 606 B.C., Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon defeated the Israeli state, and they took the Israelis captives in their 70 years desolation. Then Cyrus in 586 B.C., who was the king of Persia, defeated Babylon and permitted the Jews to return to the Promised Land. Okay, now Cyrus with Persia, that's Iran. So what happened, you had tens of thousands of Jews living in Babylon, in Persia, and then the majority of them didn't go back to the land of Palestine, to Israel. They migrated throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and they established themselves in a number of countries in North Africa and the Middle East, and they became very prominent in these countries. So this is from 586 onward BC. Now in AD 600, this is approximately 1,000 years later, the Arabs came charging out of the Arabian Peninsula, which is now Saudi Arabia, and just conquered all of the Middle East, from India westward over North Africa to the Atlantic Ocean. And Jews, by the tens of thousands, were living in these countries already. They migrated from Babylon and Persia, and some of them were living there for almost 1,000 years, and the Arabs conquered these countries, and what did they do? They made the Jews second-rate citizens. All right, Israel in 48 became an independent state. They had to fight against 7 Arab countries, and they won, and in anger, these Arab nations in North Africa and the Middle East just shoved their Jewish citizens out of their lands. Many of them fled with just the clothes on their back. Their wealth, their homes, their bank accounts were all left, so that you had 850,000 Jewish refugees expelled from Arab countries because the Arab countries were so mad at Israel for defeating the Arabs and establishing a Jewish state. Now, what happened to these 850 refugees?
850,000
refugees. For the most part, Israel absorbed them. Now, the Arabs claimed that as a result of the Israeli wars, there was 650,000 Arab refugees. Ben Gurion says that's a lie. At the most, there were less than 400,000. Whatever. 850,000 Jewish refugees absorbed by Israel. 650,000 Arab refugees could have easily been absorbed in the Arab countries, costing less than 1% of 1 year's oil revenue in the Arab countries. These Arabs could have been absorbed easy. Now, there's another interesting point on this. In 1949, Syria received their independence. France had a mandate over them, and they wanted 5 million immigrants to immediately come into Syria. They would give them free land, and they wanted them to develop the land. 5 million? Less than 1 million so-called Palestinian refugees. The Arab League passed a ruling that no Arab nation could permit Palestinian refugees settling as permanent residents or becoming citizens. The Arab League of Nations prevented the Palestinian refugees, say 650,000, from going to Syria, getting free land, and establishing a very valid living condition.
Now, that point we're going to need to come back to because we need to go into a break at this point, because that's another very, very significant point here in terms of what are the solutions and why isn't it working. And one of the reasons it's not is because the Arab nations don't want it to. That's the bottom line here. Quick points. Randall in his call was mentioning all of this Palestinian propaganda going on in the books in Saudi Arabia and so forth. Folks, type in Google Palestinian Media Watch and see what you get. There's a pretty amazing website that gives you a sense of the things that are happening that are so anti-Israel, it'll make your hair on the back of your neck stand on end. We're dealing with a very, very tenuous situation here.
This is Jonathan and Rick with Christian Questions and special guest Ken Rawson. Our question, should it be Israel or Palestine? Stay tuned.
You're listening to Christian Questions.